They ran up the stairs after. "Where's he going, Mr. Moundshroud?" "Well, I should imagine, scared as he is," said Moundshroud, "home." "Is Pipkin saved?" "Let's go see, boys. Up." He spun about like a whirlwind. His arms, flung out, cut the air in slicing grabs and swoops. So fast he spun that he made a vacuum, a self-made storm. This cyclone, this huge upsuck of air, then seized the boys by ear, nose, elbow, toe. Like so many leaves stripped from a tree, they yelled themselves into the sky. Moundshroud, raving, sank up, and they, if that is possible, sank and plummeted after. They hit the clouds like an explosion of gunshot. They followed Moundshroud like a flock of north-rushing birds heading home before their season. The earth seemed to give a turn from north to south. 1,000 small villages and towns spun under, alight with candles in tomb yards through all of Mexico, alight with candles flickering in pumpkins north of the border across Texas, and then Oklahoma and Kansas and Iowa, and at last Illinois, and at last— "Home!" cried Tom. "There's the courthouse! There's my house! There's the Halloween tree!" They swooped once around the courthouse and twice around the 1,000-pumpkin-burning tree, and a final time around old Moundshroud's tall house with its many gables, many rooms, many gaping windows, high lightning rods, railings, attics, scrollworks, which leaned and groaned in the wind their passage made. Dust sifted out of windows to greet them. Shades flapped in yet other windows like ancient tongues lolling to be diagnosed by wind-borne small doctors of strange medicines. Ghosts withered like white flowers, furling and unfurling in mouldered flags which fell to ruin even as they shot by. And the whole house, circled, was like all of Halloween ever. So cried Moundshroud, flapping his antique arms and webs and black silks as he landed on the roof and beckoned the boys to alight and pointed down through an immense sky window through all the levels of his mansion. The boys gathered round the skylight window and stared down a stairwell which opened out at various floors to various times and histories of men, and skeletons and dreadful musics played on flute bones. "There it is, boys. Will you look? Do you see? There's our whole 10,000-year flight. There's our whole trip in one place, from caveman to Egyptian to Roman front porch to English harvest field to boneyard in Mexico." Moundshroud lifted the vast pane of glass. "The stairway banister, boys. Write it down. Each to his own time, his own age, his own level. Leap off where your costume fits, where you think you and your disguise, your mask, belong. Get!" The boys leaped. They sprang down the stairwell to the top landing. Then, one by one, they popped onto the banister and slid, yelling, down through all the floors, all the levels, all the ages of history kept within Moundshroud's incredible mansion. Round about down they whisked, they skidded, they shuffled on the waxed rail. Room! Thud! J.J. in his ape-man costume landed in the basement. He glanced about. He saw cave paintings, dim smokes and fires, and shadows of hulking gorilla men. Saber-tooths burned their eyes at him from the cindered dark. Down around Rush went Ralph, the Egyptian mummified boy, bandaged for all ages, to land on the first floor where Egyptian hieroglyphs strutted in armies of symbol, with squadrons of ancient birds in skies and flocks of beast gods and scuttling golden beetles rolling dung balls down history. Crash! Hackles Nibley, with his scythe somehow still flashing in his hands, hit and almost rolled himself to mincemeat on the second floor, where the shadow of Samhain, druid, god of the dead, raised up his scythe upon a far chamber wall. Bang! George Smith, a Greek ghost, a Roman haunt, landed on the third floor near tar-painted porches which glued old wandering spirits to the sill. Thud! Henry Hank, the witch, plopped down in the fourth landing amid witches leaping bonfires in English, French, German countrysides. Fred Fryer? The fifth floor took him in a heap. The beggar landing among sounds of beggars begging the country roads of Ireland, starving. Wally Babb, the gargoyle himself, flew and crashed on the sixth floor where walls sprouted elbows and limbs and lumps, grimaces of fine gargoyle humors and glees, until finally Skeleton Tom skidded off the banister on the topmost floor to tumble and knock white candy skulls like 10 pins in a dire game among the shadows of crouched women by mounds, with miniature skeleton brass bands playing mosquito tunes while Moundshroud, far above, still on the roof, yelled down, "Well, boys, do you see? It's all one, yes?" "Yes," someone murmured. "Always the same but different, eh? Every age, every time. Day was always over. Night was always coming. And aren't you always afraid, Ape-Man there, or you, Mummy, that the sun will never rise again?" "Yes," more of them whispered, and they looked up through the levels of the great house and saw every age, every story, and all the men in history staring round about as the sun rose and set. Ape-men trembled, Egyptians cried laments, Greeks and Romans paraded their dead. Summer fell dead, winter put it in the grave. 1,000,000,000 voices wept. The wind of time shook the vast house. The windows rattled and broke like men's eyes into crystal tears. Then, with cries of delight, 10,000 times 1,000,000 men welcomed back bright summer suns which rose to burn each window with fire. Do you see, lads? Think. People vanished forever. They died, oh Lord, they died, but came back in dreams. Those dreams were called ghosts and frightened men in every age. Ah! Cried 1,000,000,000 voices from attics and basements. Shadows climbed walls like old films rerun in ancient theaters. Puffs of smoke lingered at doors with sad eyes and gibbering mouths. Night and day. Summer and winter, boys. Seed time and harvest. Life and death, that's what Halloween is, all rolled up in one. Noon and midnight. Being born, boys. Rolling over, playing dead like dogs, lads, and getting up again, barking, racing through thousands of years of death, each day and each night. Halloween, boys, every night, every single night, dark and fearful, until at last you made it and hid in cities and towns and had some rest and could get your breath. And you began to live longer and have more time, and space out the deaths and put away fear, and at last have only special days in each year when you thought of night and dawn and spring and autumn and being born and being dead. And it all adds up. 4,000 years ago, 100 years ago, this year, one place or another, but the celebration's all the same. The Feast of Samhain. The time of the dead ones. All Souls, All Saints. The Day of the Dead. El Dia de Muerte. All Hallows. Halloween. The boys sent their frail voices up through the levels of time, from all the countries and all the ages, naming the holidays which were the same. Good, lads, good. Far off, the town clock struck 11:15. Almost midnight, boys. Halloween's almost over. "But," cried Tom, "what about Pipkin? We followed him through history, burying him, digging him up, walking him in parades, crying him in wakes. Is or isn't he alive?" "Yeah," said everyone. "Did we save him?" "Did you indeed?" Moundshroud stared. They stared with him across the ravine to a building where lights were going out. That's his hospital, boys. But check his house, the final knock of the night, the last grand trick-or-treat. Go ask for final answers. Mr. Marley, see them out. The front door flew wide. Bang! The Marley knocker on the door gaped its bandaged jaw and whistled them farewell as the boys slid down the banisters and raced for the door. They were stopped by a final shout from Mound Shroud. "Boys! Well, which was it, tonight, with me? Trick or treat?" The boys took a vast breath, held it, burst it out. "Gosh, Mr. Mound Shroud, both!" Rap went the Marley knocker, slam went the door, and the boys were gone, running down through the ravine and up along the street, gasping hot gusts of air, their masks falling to be trampled until at last they stopped on Pipkin's sidewalk and looked at the far hospital and back at Pipkin's front door. "You go, Tom, you," said Ralph, and Tom slowly edged up to the house and put his foot on the front step, and then the second step up, and approached the door, afraid to knock, afraid to find the final answer about dear old Pipkin. Pipkin dead? Pipkin in a last funeral? Pipkin gone forever? No. He tapped at the door. The boys waited on the sidewalk. The door opened. Tom went in. There was a long moment of the boys on the sidewalk, standing cold and letting the wind freeze their most awful thoughts. "Well?" they yelled silently in at the house, the shut door, the dark windows. "Well? Well? What?" And then at last the door opened again, and Tom came out and stood on the porch, not knowing where he was. Then Tom looked up and saw his friends waiting for him 1,000,000 miles off. Tom leaped off the porch, yelling, "Oh, gosh! Oh, gosh! Oh, gosh!" He ran along the sidewalk, shrieking, "He's okay! He's all right! He's okay! Pipkin's in the hospital. Took his appendix out at 9 tonight. Got it just in time. Doctor says he's great." Pipkin? Hospital? Great? The air jumped out as if each had been punched in the stomach. Then the air went in and out again in a great rave, a yell, a ragged shout of triumph. "Pipkin! Oh, Pipkin! Pip!" And the boys stood on Pipkin's lawn and the sidewalk in front of Pipkin's porch and house and looked with numb curiosity at each other as their smiles spread and their eyes watered and they yelled and the happy tears ran down their cheeks. "Oh, boy, boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy," said Tom, exhausted and weeping with happiness. "You can say that again," said someone, and they all said it again. And they all stood there and had a fine, happy cry. And since the whole night was turning soupy with tears, Tom looked around and revved them up. "Look at Pipkin's house. Don't it look awful? Tell you what we do." And they ran, and each came back carrying a lit pumpkin and lined them up on Pipkin's porch rail, where they smiled outrageous smiles to wait for Pipkin to come home. And they stood on the lawn and looked at the lovely sight of all those smiles, their costumes tattered upon their arms and shoulders and legs, and the grease paint dripped and running on their faces, and a great, wondrous, happy tiredness gathering in their eyelids and arms and feet, but not wanting to go yet. And the town clock struck midnight. Gung! And gung again to a full count of 12, and Halloween was over. And all about the town, doors were slamming and lights going out. The boys began to drift, saying, "Night," and "Night," and again, "Night," and some, "Good night," but most, "Night," yes, "Night," and the lawn was empty, but Pipkin's porch was just full of candle illumination and warmth and baked pumpkin smell. And ghost and mummy and skeleton and witch and all the rest were back at their own homes, on their own porches, and each turned to look at the town and remember this special night they would never in all their lives ever forget, and they looked across the town at one another's porches, but especially on and over across the ravine, to that great house where at the very top Mr. Mound Shroud stood on his spike-railinged roof. The boys waved, each from his own porch. The smoke curling out of the high Mound Shroud Gothic chimney fluttered, motioned, waved back, and still more doors were slamming to lock all around town, and with each slam, one more pumpkin, and then another, and another, and another on the huge Halloween tree snuffed out, by the dozens, by the hundreds, by the thousands. Doors banged, pumpkins went blind, snuffed candles smoked delicious smokes. The witch hesitated, went in, shut the door. A witch-faced pumpkin on the tree went dark. The mummy stepped into his house and shut his door. A pumpkin with the face of a mummy extinguished its light. And finally, the last boy in all the town remaining alone on his veranda, Tom Skelton in his skull and bones, hating to go in, wanting to wring the last dear drop from his favorite holiday in all the year, sent his thoughts on the night air toward the strange house beyond the ravine. "Mr. Mounshroud, who are you?" And Mr. Mounshroud, way up there on the roof, sent his thoughts back. "I think you know, boy. I think you know. Will we meet again, Mr. Mounshroud? Many years from now, yes, I'll come for you." And a last thought from Tom. "Oh, Mr. Mounshroud, will we ever stop being afraid of nights and death?" And the thought returned, "When you reach the stars, boy, yes, and live there forever, all the fears will go, and Death himself will die." Tom listened, heard, and waved quietly. Mr. Mounshroud, far off, lifted his hand. Click. Tom's front door went shut. His pumpkin like a skull on the vast tree sneezed and went dark. The wind stirred the great Halloween tree, which was now empty of all light save one pumpkin at the very top. A pumpkin with Mr. Mounshroud's eyes and face. At the top of the house, Mr. Mounshroud leaned out, took a breath, blew. His candle in his pumpkin head on the tree fluttered, died. Miraculously, smoke curled out of his own mouth, his nose, his ears, his eyes, as if his soul had been extinguished within his lungs at the very moment the sweet pumpkin gave up its incensed ghost. He sank down into his house. The roof trapdoor closed. The wind came by. It rocked all the dark, smoking pumpkins on the vast and beautiful Halloween tree. The wind seized 1,000 dark leaves and blew them away up over the sky and down over the earth toward the sun that must surely rise. Like the town, the tree turned off its embered smiles and slept. At 2 in the morning, the wind came back for more leaves. This concludes the reading of The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury. Copyright 1972 by Ray Bradbury. Copyright renewed 2000 by Ray Bradbury. This book was read by Bronson Pinchot. This unabridged recording was published by arrangement with Ray Bradbury and was produced in 2011 by Blackstone Audio, Inc., which holds the copyright. Neither this recording nor any portion of it may be reproduced or used for any purpose without prior written authorization from Blackstone Audio, Inc. Thank you.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.